Welcome back to another AP Pre-Calc video. Today we're looking at our 3.5 notes. This is all about writing trigonometric equations or functions. We're going to be focusing on sine and cosine for this video today. So, few things in order to create our function is we always need to know the amplitude, we need to know the period, and the frequency. Reminders of each of those are at the top. Amplitude is the distance from the midline to the maximum or minimum. Period is how long it takes for the function to repeat its wave-like cycle. And the frequency is the b value in the generic equation. This is found by dividing 2 pi by the period. One thing we might need from the last video, if you did not watch it, is our transformation version of our sine or cosine function. One thing you also want to remember is sine and cosine. Their functions repeat a lot. So you could come up with different functions than I have in this video, but each of them should give you the exact same graph. They might just be transformed horizontally different amounts. Okay, so here's what our functions would look like in their transformation form. Other reminders you might need is we know that sine of x always starts at the midline, goes up and down for its cycle. Cosine always starts at the top, goes down and back up for its cycle. Okay, now let's go ahead and jump into this first problem. We were told we need a few things. One of those things is the amplitude. Remember, the amplitude is the a value in the function. Well, we need to know how far from the midline is the maximum and minimum. That looks like a value of 3 and a value of 3 to me. We know a is a value of 3. We can always find the period. How long does it take to repeat a cycle? Well, you could always look at that from the midline to, okay, it goes up, it goes down. Here's where it would be restarting. So to me, one period looks like it is 2 pi. We could look at the frequency. Frequency is found, which is the b value. So I'm going to change this to b equals instead. Where b is equal to 2 pi divided by the period, where the period is also 2 pi. That gives us a value of 1 in this case. We also know the midline. The midline, remember, is the vertical translation. So it's going to end up being the k value. In this case, our midline, the k value is just up 1. So if I were to create a function for this, we can start to fill in our function above. I can get rid of the a. I can get rid of the b value. I don't know what h is, so I'm going to leave it out of it right now, but I do know k is 1. In order to figure out what the h value is, you need to figure out what type of function are you building first. In this case, I've built a sine function. Again, sine, it has a starting point where it goes up, down before it completes a cycle. If I were to look at this on the graph, that would be shown, let's use purple. That would be shown from here going up, going down, and returning. Notice that starting point right here was not horizontally translated at all. It is still on the y-axis. I did not move that starting point from left to right at all. So in this case, the h value would be 0 for a sine function. However, if I were to build a cosine function, cosine functions get built the exact same way. However, there's going to be one change in it. We need to figure out the horizontal translation. Well, let's choose another color. Maybe let's go orange this time. We know that cosine functions start at the top, go down, and repeat to get back to the maximum. So if I wanted a cosine function, one spot you could choose it to start would be at pi halves right here, where, okay, it then goes down, it goes back up before completing one cycle. Notice that starting point here has been moved from the y-axis. It's been horizontally translated pi halves to the right. So in order to show that, I could subtract pi halves inside this function. Now I have built a sine and a cosine function that both represent the exact same graph, one that has a horizontal translation and the other does not. You could again use that same process for these other problems. You could identify the amplitude, the midline, you could find the b value and the period, all to create our function. The midline in this case looks like it's at -3. The amplitude in this case looks like it's only a value of 1. We know that the b value is how long is found by 2 pi over the period. Well, if I look at top to top, it looks like it took from 0 to pi halves. So my b value, the period, would be on the bottom. If I were to multiply or divide this out, we would end up getting a value of 4. Remember, you can always do copy.flip in order to divide fractions. And then once you have all of that, you can look at your horizontal translations if needed. Let's start by creating both of our functions. Y equals a times sine. Then we need our b value on the inside. 4 times x plus whatever the horizontal shift is. And it looks like we went down 3. If I want a sine function, remember a sine function is found by taking where it starts, which is normally at the midline. Well, a few places you could find that. I see it starts at the midline here. I see it starts at the midline here. Realize I am not using this spot. The reason I am not using that is that goes down first before going up. I do not want that. My sine functions that we are used to creating go up first. So I could start it at -pi8, or I could start it at 3 pi8. Either one would work. You could create both those. They would give you the same graph. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use the one that got shifted left, pi8. So that would mean I'd add pi8 to the inside. Oops. Again, if you wanted an equivalent form, you could have x minus 3 pi8 for another starting point. If I were to create a cosine function, all of it stays the same, except for my horizontal translation. We know that cosine starts at the top, goes down. In this case, that is right on the y-axis. It starts at the top, goes down, and then returns. That means there is no horizontal translation if you create a cosine function. That would be 2 or 3 forms that you might use. Let's go ahead. Let's look at some other types of problems. This next one says write a cosine function that has an amplitude of 4, midline of 3, and a period of 1/3. So I know A, I know the K value, I know the P value, but I do not know what B represents. B can always be found by 2 pi over the period though, which would end up giving us 6 pi. So my function in this case, if I replace A, we're using cosine, they said. I replace the B in our formula. We don't have any horizontal translation, they said, but the midline, the K value, is up 3. Same idea, but now they just gave you the information instead, and we still did have to find B. There is another example. Let's look at 2 more. Looking at this next one, it says, given the equation, identify the information. We know that the amplitude is just the value in front. Period, we know, can be found from this equation here. Let's manipulate this real quick. If I want to solve for P instead, I could multiply P up to the other side. That would give me a function like this. So if I want the period, then I would divide the B over, giving me 2 pi over B. So the period in this case, 2 pi over the B value. The B value is 8. If you were to simplify that, you'd get pi fourths is the period. The midline, that's just how far up did we shift our graph. Our K value in this case is 3, so we've identified the midline. The horizontal shift, it looks like we went right 2 units. So 2 units right. And then we could also find the range. Well, let's think about our graph. So we know the midline is a value of 3, right? This is y equals 3. I know the amplitude of my sine graph goes up 5 units and it goes down 5 units. Meaning the top of my graph would now get to a value of 8, and the bottom of my graph would now get down to a value of -2, simply found by adding or subtracting the amplitude. So our range then, minimum comma maximum, would be -2 comma 8. There's another example. Last problem now. This one a little bit weirder. You can start to identify the information pretty quickly. We know the period is 2 pi over b, but you're going to run into issues. Remember, whenever we look at these functions, we always want them in our factored form. That means the 7 pi 6, the coefficient on r, needs to get factored out. It needs to get divided out of each of the terms on the inside. So 7 pi 6 goes in front of r. But I also need to divide 7 pi 6 out of the 49 pi 6. Well, when you do that division, the 7 pi is going to divide the top. So 49 pi divided by 7 pi would just give me a value of 7. And the 6 is going to divide the other 6. So 6 divided by 6 gives us a value of 1. Or you could just call that 7. So now that we've factored it, now I can determine what the period is, because now I know the b value is 7 pi 6. Again, copy dot flip that if you need. Looks like the pi's would cancel and we would get 12/7 in this case. We can start to identify some other information as well. The horizontal shift, now that it's factored, we can actually determine that. Because it's adding on the inside, that would mean it's going to the left. Looks like it's going left 7 units in this case. The midline we know is just the k value. It's the vertical change, which is 18. And the range, let's think about it. Midline at 18 here. We go up 8, we go down 8 based off the amplitude. So the bottom would be at 10, the top would be at 26 for the range. Thanks for watching another AP Pre-Calc video. Let me know if you need anything.